Amen. At this time, I would like to introduce Leland Finley. Come on up, Leland. And Leland is here to represent disaster relief, which is one of the many ministries that is done through the Missouri Baptist Convention, and also receives some funding from MMO, and I'm sure you can tell us about that. But anyways, Leland is also my regional Royal Ambassador's rep here in the area. So he's going to help inform us, and Leland might even tell us about the relationship between Royal Ambassadors and disaster relief, but I don't know.
Yeah, well,
anyways, here we go.
All right. Well, as a bit of an introduction, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I'm a member at Linden Baptist Church in Clay Platte Association. I've been involved with disaster relief for a number of years, but I have been a Christian since 1969 and got saved, really saved. The first time around was I got wet when I was about 12. And the second time around, it was for real and serious, and I accepted Christ as my Savior. I've been a ham radio operator since 1964, and that was what got me into disaster relief. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but disaster relief is one of the ministries that is partially funded, and I won't say funded, but partially funded by the Missouri Missions Offering. And it is one of the serious ministries of Missouri Baptists and of the Southern Baptist Convention. I've got a question for you. What is a disaster? Well, the definition of a disaster says disasters are serious disruptions to the functioning of a community that exceeds its capacity to escape using its own resources. That's a big way of saying disaster is a problem. Now, it leads to one or more of the following: either human, material, or economic and environmental losses and impacts. And we don't have to look too far to see what a disaster does. They can be caused by natural, man-made, and technological hazards, as well as various factors that influence the exposure and vulnerability of a community. Now, there's 5 common types of disasters. The first one is a tectonic shift, which we know more familiarly as an earthquake. A lunar activity. If you live near the ocean, tidal waves that are bad riptides, particularly from serious moon interruptions, and they do happen. Deforestation is a third one, and that can either be man-made or it could be a fire. California has had a real problem with that. If you noticed early this morning, there was a little bit of smoke in the air along with some fog. That smoke's coming from Canada, and they have wildfires all over Canada. It's been worse. It's getting better, but they don't have those fires out. California, Washington, Oregon have all had serious fires that are one of the reasons for disaster. There was one in Colorado several years ago, and it around Boulder did some very serious devastation. Our group went out to Boulder, Colorado, and did what we call ash out. We go through the burned out remains and see what we can find that might be of value to a homeowner. It's amazing what we found out there. Another one is soil erosion. Could be wind, it could be water. And the last one is air pressure. You may not realize it, but extremely low air pressure can cause serious disasters to certain peoples. Now, other problems which may contribute to disasters: ocean currents, from tsunamis. Tsunamis are not nice to deal with. Pollution of air or water. Mining. We don't have much of that around here. There, in some of the central Missouri areas, there was some real problems with strip mining, coal mining, back a number of years ago. But mining can also be a problem, in certain areas, or seismic waves, as we talked about with earthquakes. The most common type of disaster and most frequent, though, is flooding. The most famous flood was the Great Flood, and it destroyed almost all non-aquatic forms of life. That disaster is referenced in Genesis 6. Let me share with you what Genesis 6 says as I get out my Bible. Somebody told me if you have a smartphone and it doesn't have a Bible on it, it isn't very smart. So Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 5, says, and when you, no, that's Matthew. I want Old Testament. Come on. Genesis 6, beginning in verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. And he regretted that he'd made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move around the ground, for I regret that I have made them. That's God speaking. Remember, he spoke them into existence. And that was the purpose and the reason behind the great flood, was to destroy mankind and everything on the face of the earth. Now, only Noah and his immediate family and a representative sample of each one of the life forms that were non-aquatic. Remember that the aquatic life forms did not get destroyed. Fish did not get ruined by a flood. A lot of people forget about that. But floods are most typically caused by excessive rainfall or snowmelt. If you live in a mountainous area and they get a lot of snow over the winter, snowmelt can cause serious flooding. It can also cause some flooding downstream on some of the rivers. We've had some floods on the Missouri River. I live in Riverside, Missouri, which is about a half mile up. I'm about a half mile up from the Missouri River. And we've had floods in Riverside, partly caused by rainfall and partly caused by snowmelt when they released water from upstream. For our time together, we're going to focus on natural disasters and how we can interact as volunteers to counteract the effects of a disaster on humanity. The Bible speaks of the first great flood in Genesis 6:7, and that's where God said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. And he said that because of that great wickedness. Now, at that time, mankind had never experienced rain. It had never rained once in the history of the earth up to that point. So they didn't know what rain was. And when Noah began building a boat, they laughed at him. It took him 100 years. Any of you been around 100 years to build a boat? He lived several hundred years after that. When we think of what happened in Noah's day, we only have to look around and see some of the same evil happening in today's world. But God, however, promised Noah and us that he would never again replicate the great flood. So he did this by putting his bow, we call it a rainbow, in the sky. Now, science can describe the physics of how it happens and how it works, but they can't explain why it only comes when sun shines through a raindrop. So you don't see a rainbow unless there's been a rain or it is raining and the sun is shining through it. Sometimes you get some pretty impressive rainbows. Today, let's turn from that biblical record then and other disasters mentioned in scriptures and look at what happens today and how volunteers can be involved. One of the first that I can remember is back in 1967, Hurricane Beulah struck Texas, and it did a lot of devastation and left deforestation and homeless and hungry people in its wake. A group of royal ambassadors, boys, missions group boys, were coming home from a camp out, and their leader heard that they needed to have help for this Hurricane Beulah. And so I'll share more about that. I'd like to share some information about Missouri Baptist Disaster Relief with you today. And if you'll direct your attention to the screen, we're going to look at some of that and see just exactly what took place. Southern Baptist Convention Disaster Relief provides help, hope, and healing in a lost and damaged world. One of the examples of this is in Nehemiah, and one of these is in Noah, when we have the record of the Great Flood. Now, let me give you a short history of this disaster relief and tell you a little bit more about this problem with Hurricane Beulah. That's the beginnings. The Southern Baptist Convention Home Missions Board, which is now called North American Mission Board, but the Home Mission Board was allotted $50,000 to use in disaster relief. In 1967, Hurricane Beulah hit Texas. A group of royal ambassadors were coming home, and the leader got called to respond. Well, all they had was buddy burners, which is a little homemade burner that you set a pot on, and you can cook on it. And they proceeded to provide food for victims and workers using nothing but buddy burners. And that was the beginning of what we now know as disaster relief. Pretty amazing. And Texas Baptists can tell you all about that. They kind of pride themselves in being the first to provide disaster relief. Now, Southern Baptist Disaster Relief has grown into one of 3 agencies that provide help, hope, and healing to storm and disaster victims. The 3 primary ones are the American Red Cross, Southern Baptist Convention Disaster Relief, and the Salvation Army. Samaritan's Purse also provides, but they are not one of the big 3. So let's look at Disaster Relief's motto. One of the ministries of the Clay Platte Baptist Disaster Relief Group is to provide a small toy to a child victim of a flood disaster. Now, if you notice there in the picture, there's a small child in the upper left that is holding on to a looks like a rag doll, basically, and we provide those and show those for kids that have been involved. But often these toys have been ruined in the flood, and they don't have anything left. And so transportation to and from a disaster is needed. We need something bigger than a half-ton pickup to do it. And one of the adult giveaways is this penny on the lower left that has a cross. And this is a great way to share with any adult affected that Christ is still the center of emphasis, regardless of the scope of the disaster. Here's some recent call-outs. Glen Allen, Missouri. Glen Allen is down in the southeast part of Missouri. Linneus, Missouri, which is in the northeast part, and they had a tornado up there and did a lot of tree damage, and so they had to have disaster relief people come in and remove these trees. They didn't have enough local people with chainsaws and equipment and ability to do that. Crews from Kansas City, Macon, southern Missouri responded, and city officials estimated that 90% of the small town's properties were affected. Another town that was affected not too distant past was Greensburg, Kansas, and it just about wiped that town off. Bethany, Missouri. I was at Bethany and worked in that tornado damage. Bering, Missouri, which is over the northeast part again. Venice, Florida, which was part of a hurricane disaster. St. Louis, Missouri, with flood recovery, and there was 2 different ones. There was one recently, and then there was one several years ago in December and January. And if you can imagine trying to keep a food trailer thawed out when it's 25 degrees above and never got any warmer than that, trying to keep the water lines open so you could make food things, you had problems there. Ruidoso, New Mexico had an ash out. As I mentioned earlier, the one over in Boulder, Colorado also had an ash out. And then the Princeton, Dawson, Kentucky tornado, which was in February, back down not too far off the state line of Missouri and Kentucky. Now, Missouri Baptist Disaster Relief has some requirements for training. Member of Missouri Baptist Church, that would qualify anyone here. Prayerful attitude toward those affected by a disaster. A desire to learn. Attend a training session. There's only 4 annually in Missouri, and one of them is coming up. registration for a training session, background check, fee. There's a fee. First time is $45, and if you need a recertification after 5 years, my tag will expire in 2024. So next year, or the next year, I'll need to get mine renewed. And then bring personal items for lodging, bedroll, personal hygiene, clothing, things like that. Now, Missouri Baptist Disaster Relief training opportunities are provided across the state in 4 basic locations that give people a place where they don't have to drive forever to get there. If you had to drive to northeast Missouri, that'd be a long ways to drive. The last one that we have is going to be in Houston, Missouri, and it's October the 6th and 7th. So that may affect some of your activities. If you're going to go to that training session, you might get home in time for the evening of the 7th. But it's going to be in Houston, Missouri. Houston, Missouri is down in the southern part of the state. Go ahead and
It's catching up to you.
I'll wait.
The one in Clinton is usually in April, right?
Yes, that was in April. There's been one in Blue Springs, there's been one in Clinton, there's been one in Chillicothe, there's been one in Macon. This year, there was one in Macon, there was one in Clinton, there was one just a week or so ago in Eureka, Missouri, which is over toward St. Louis, and the last one is down in Houston, Missouri, in the southern part. Now, what are the areas? Mass care and feeding, chainsaw, flood recovery, communications, radio, and more. And it's not just ham radio. Shower and laundry, child care. Now, there are 3 other areas that require previous call-outs and a referral. And so incident management, this is the head shed, so to speak, where all the, quote, bigwigs hang out at a disaster, the ones that are in charge. The white hat, the guy that's doing all the work. I've got 2 hats over here, one's yellow and one's blue, and I will talk about that in a minute. Then the assessors, you don't go and assess a disaster unless you've been to some disasters and have some experience. I am trained as an assessor. And then chaplaincy, which is kind of like a preacher in a sense, but it's a minister to their spiritual need as well as their physical needs. As you can see down at the bottom of that state map there, that's where Houston, Missouri is. And it would be about probably a 3-hour drive from here. Okay, let me answer some questions. Do I need to be a part of a disaster group to go on a call out? No. You do not have to have, from Enon Baptist Church, a disaster relief group organized here. You can go, if you are trained, you can go to other groups and be a part of theirs. You can be trained in one of those different areas. Can I go on a call out before I am trained? Yes. There have been several call outs recently where they have requested people to come and be a part of the work. So you don't have to be trained, but it's a good idea if you want to be involved and know more about it and know proper ways of doing some of the things to be trained. How do I find out if there's a need to respond? Well, if you're trained, you will be giving information to the Missouri Baptist Convention's disaster relief group, and Leland Moss, who is our state director, and let's see, what's his name? But Galen will be the one that will send out information regarding the need for trained workers. Can I just go and help? No. You don't just show up. You have to wait to be called out. If you just go and show up, the problem is you don't know what you're doing. You might be more in the way than be helpful. And so it's a good idea to go and be trained before you try to go. Now, am I too old to be an effective disaster relief worker? No. There was a 102-year-old woman that all she did was keep chainsaws running. She sharpened them. She didn't start them, but she sharpened them. She checked to make sure they had gas and oil in them. and she was at the trailer, and she didn't move out of the trailer, but she was a no spring chicken. Child care, of which I'm also a part, and I have a special badge for that, and that takes special training. Child care always needs more helpers. At the Missouri Baptist Convention in October, the Missouri Baptist child care people will be taking care of the children that come, whose parents are a part of as
The convention.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at some things of disaster relief in action. The recently renovated exterior of the Clay Platte chainsaw trailer is at one of the sites in Bethany, shows where it was. Now, this particular site had a hickory nut tree that had blown over. I did not put a picture of it in there, but this was a tree that had blown over at the pastor's house for the First Baptist Church of Bethany, and it did several serious damage to his Chevrolet Camaro. Broke all the glass out of it. Now, he had gone out the evening before and put a tarp on it before we got there. You know, whether it's removing storm damage or providing a warm meal when people are unable to cook, disaster relief volunteers are always ready to act and provide what's needed to those affected. With the training provided by Missouri Baptist, you too can be a part of the volunteer ministry to those affected, whether it's fire, flood, tornado, winter storm, or hurricane. And you can check out the opportunities at the next training session. It's not too late to be trained. You can still get training and you can still sign up. October 6th and 7th is not quite 3 weeks away, but it's still an opportunity to do that. So, with that in mind, you know, when we look at the opportunities presented to become the hands and feet of Jesus while volunteering through disaster relief, it brings into focus what Jesus said in Matthew 25:31 through 46 in describing when we do something for the least of others. And we say, well, when did we do that? We didn't know that. And he says, when you did it to the least of one of mine, you did it to me. The closest group with an organized disaster relief team is in the Blue River, Kansas City area over at Blue Springs, and their director is Roger Masters. And he would be willing to help you get a group together if you want to get started, and he would also accept you as a volunteer into his group over at Blue River, Kansas City group. And I can give Brother Webb information about Roger's phone number, his email, and so on and so forth, and I will let him know that if you have people that are interested. Any questions? Anything you would like to know that I haven't covered? Any questions you've got that came up? See me after church and we'll talk. Okay?
Thank you, Leland, for coming and sharing.
Thank you for letting
that
us
with
letting
us.
me be
All
there.
right. Amen.